The Battle of Bach Dang, when a small nation drowned an empire. In the spring of 1288, the tide of the Bach Dang River carried more than just seawater. It bore the final breath of an empire's arrogance. 60,000 soldiers of the Mongol Yuan dynasty, conquerors of Asia and terror of the known world, sailed into Vietnam believing victory was inevitable. By dusk, their mighty fleet was aflame, shattered among the stakes hidden beneath the waves. The sky was dark with smoke and ash. The river glowed red as if it had swallowed the sun itself. In one single day, the invincible army that had crushed China, Persia, and Russia was undone by a nation smaller than one of its provinces. This was not merely a battle. It was a test of wits, courage, and destiny. A clash between brute force and the cunning of a commander who understood the rhythm of the tides and the heart of his people. How did a small kingdom, outnumbered 100 to 1, drown an empire? The 13th century was the age of empires. From the frozen tundra of Siberia to the plains of Hungary, the Mongol Empire stretched like a shadow across the earth. No kingdom could stand against its iron hooves. Cities burned, dynasties fell, and kings kneeled before the Great Khan. Yet far to the south, at the edge of the world's map, lay a small kingdom called Đại Việt, a land of rivers, mangroves, and restless monsoons. Its people were farmers, fishermen, and warriors, molded by floods and storms. They knew the ways of water better than any empire built on dry land. When Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis himself, turned his gaze toward the south, he saw Đại Việt as nothing more than a stepping stone to conquer the rest of Southeast Asia. His son, Prince Togon, was sent to complete the task that had humiliated the Mongols twice before. The empire demanded revenge. In Thăng Long, the royal capital, King Tran Nan Tong gathered his council. The memories of past invasions still lingered. Burned cities, scattered families, the ashes of resistance. But among his generals stood one man who had turned defeat into doctrine, Trần Hưng Đạo, the philosopher general who once vowed never to let the rivers of his homeland run red with surrender. This time, the Mongols came prepared. Their fleet numbered in the thousands, carrying soldiers hardened by endless wars in China and Korea. They believed victory was certain. After all, who could resist the empire that ruled half the known world? But they did not understand the land they sailed into. They did not understand the patience of its people. And above all, they did not understand the man who had been waiting for them. Because on the banks of the Bach Dang River, the tides were not just of water, they were of fate. The royal court of Đại Việt was divided. Some ministers, weary of endless war, urged peace. "We have suffered enough," they pleaded. "Let us offer tribute and survive." Others argued that to surrender was to invite annihilation. In the center of the chamber, silent yet burning with resolve, stood Trần Hưng Đạo. His voice finally broke the air. "Those who surrender may live for a day, but their children will live in chains forever. I would rather die standing than live kneeling." The decision was made. The kingdom would fight. Meanwhile, in the north, Prince Togon's vast army assembled along the frontier. It was a force unlike anything Southeast Asia had ever seen. Ironclad cavalry, seasoned archers, and an enormous navy built to crush the defiant southern kingdom once and for all. The Mongol drums of war echoed down the valleys, and the message was clear: no mercy, no retreat. As the enemy advanced, Trần Hưng Đạo began studying the tides, the terrain, and the rhythm of the rivers. He knew that facing the Mongols head-on was suicide. His victory would not come from strength, it would come from wisdom. "If the mountain cannot move," he told his captains, "then let the river fight for us." The king entrusted him with absolute command. Villages were evacuated. Supplies were hidden. The army withdrew southward in a feigned retreat, luring the invaders deeper into the labyrinth of the Red River Delta. Togon, confident of triumph, sent word to Kublai Khan, "The Viet are fleeing. The empire will soon have its southern jewel." But in truth, he was already walking into a snare of patience and precision, a trap born not from desperation, but from design. For beneath the calm waters of the Bach Dang River, something waited, something sharp, something ancient, 1,000 wooden stakes buried deep, ready to rise with the turning tide. Spring returned to the Red River Delta, bringing with it the scent of salt and mud. The Mongol fleet advanced southward like a floating city, warships bristling with arrows, drums beating across the wind. From afar, villagers watched in silence as the horizon turned black with sails. It seemed as if the sea itself had risen to devour them. But this time, the people of Đại Việt were not afraid. Every withdrawal, every burned bridge, every abandoned field was part of a greater plan. Under Trần Hưng Đạo orders, the rivers were mapped, the currents studied, and the tides measured down to the hour. Soldiers disguised as fishermen drifted silently through the mangroves, counting the enemy's movements. Beneath the muddy waters of the Bach Dang River, carpenters and divers worked night after night, driving sharpened wooden stakes into the riverbed, hundreds of them hidden just below the surface. The Mongols saw only retreat. To them, the Vietnamese seemed broken, their capital deserted, their army scattered. Prince Togon laughed when his generals warned him of caution. "Let them run," he said. "Even the earth trembles before us." But the land of Đại Việt was not trembling. It was breathing, waiting. As the Mongol fleet pressed deeper inland, their supply lines began to stretch thin. Food grew scarce. Disease crept into their ranks. The humid air choked the northern soldiers unaccustomed to tropical rivers. The once invincible Mongol cavalry found themselves trapped in narrow marshlands where their horses could barely stand. Trần Hưng Đạo, meanwhile, watched from the shadows. He allowed skirmishes to occur, small clashes designed to lure Togon further into the heart of the delta. He issued orders in whispers. "Do not fight to win, fight to delay. Let the tide work for us." At dawn on the 17th day of the campaign, the tide began to rise. Togon's armada, hundreds of massive vessels, entered the mouth of the Bach Dang River, chasing what appeared to be a retreating Vietnamese flotilla. In truth, those smaller ships were bait. Aboard one of them stood General Trần Can Du, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he saw the water reach its highest mark, he gave a single nod. "Now," he murmured, "let them come." The Mongols surged forward, roaring with triumph as they pursued the fleeing enemy up the river. Their ships advanced swiftly, heavy with armor and confidence. They could already see the smaller Vietnamese vessels turning back toward the inner river, a cornered prey. But the prey had claws. At noon, the tide began to fall, slowly at first, then faster. The currents reversed direction, pulling the Mongol ships toward the hidden stakes below. One by one, the great iron hulls shuddered as they struck unseen obstacles. The water frothed red as hulls split open, and soldiers tumbled into the river. Trần Hưng Đạo raised his banner from the shore, a simple cloth painted with a single word, "Strike." From the surrounding banks and hidden coves, thousands of Vietnamese soldiers erupted into view. Fire arrows streaked through the air, setting the trapped ships ablaze. War drums thundered across the delta, echoing through the mangrove walls. Panic spread among the Mongols. Their ships, too large to maneuver, collided and burned. Men leapt into the water, only to be impaled upon the stakes below. Togon watched in disbelief as his fleet disintegrated before his eyes. His shouts for retreat were swallowed by the roar of the flames. "The river itself has betrayed us," cried one of his captains. "No," said another, trembling. "It is the river that fights for them." For hours, the Bach Dang was an inferno. Smoke coiled upward like black serpents into the afternoon sky. The cries of drowning soldiers mingled with the chanting of Vietnamese warriors charging from both banks. By dusk, the current slowed, carrying with it the wreckage of an empire. Only a few scattered vessels escaped to the open sea. Prince Togon, his armor drenched and his spirit broken, fled north under the cover of night. Behind him, the river glowed with fire, an open wound upon the pride of the Mongol world. On the shore, Trần Hưng Đạo watched in silence. His face was calm, his voice low. "The tide has turned," he said. "Let the empire remember this day." The flames reflected in his eyes as the wind carried the smell of victory, mixed with ash in the salt of tears. The sun sank into the horizon, staining the water the color of blood. Across the Bach Dang River, fire danced upon the waves as the wrecks of Mongol warships crackled and groaned, their masts collapsing like dying giants. The once proud banners of the UN Empire burned to ash in the wind. From the high bank, Trần Hưng Đạo stood still, watching the spectacle not as a conqueror, but as a witness to destiny. He had not needed gods or miracles, only the tide, patience, and the will of his people. Below, chaos reigned. Trapped between the stakes and the retreating current, the Mongol fleet disintegrated. Commanders shouted orders no one could hear. Horses screamed as they drowned, their armor dragging them into the black depths. Men clawed at the sides of sinking ships, their faces lit by the reflection of burning oil on the surface. The river hissed like molten metal as fire met water. "The tide is falling! Push the ships free," cried a Mongol officer. "It's too late," whispered another, staring at the forest of stakes jutting from the waves. From every bank came the sound of war drums, steady, relentless, echoing like a heartbeat. Arrows rained from above, their tips flaming, turning the river into a furnace. Tran Khan Du's flotilla surged forward, ramming into the immobilized enemy vessels. One after another, the great ships splintered apart, engulfed by flames. Prince Togan watched helplessly from the rear, his armor scorched, his hands trembling. He had led the greatest army of the age, and it was dying before his eyes, devoured not by men, but by the river itself. A voice carried over the wind, the calm, steady tone of Trần Hưng Đạo. "You came with arrogance, and the river has humbled you. This is not our victory, it is justice." He lowered his hand. At once, the horns of Đại Việt sounded. The remaining Mongol ships were surrounded and set ablaze. The night became a mirror of hell, the sky red, the water gold, the air thick with the cries of thousands. By dawn, it was over. The river was silent again, except for the crackle of drifting embers. The stakes stood like blackened teeth rising from the mist. Between them floated the ruins of an empire that had once ruled half the world. Trần Hưng Đạo knelt beside the water, his reflection flickering with the dying flames. "No empire is eternal," he murmured. "Only honor endures." And so ended the greatest battle ever fought on Vietnamese soil, a moment when a nation too small to be found on most maps carved its name into eternity. When morning came, the Bach Dang River no longer roared with fury. The tide had washed away the fire, leaving behind a field of drifting corpses and charred timber. Seagulls circled above, crying over the remnants of the fallen. The stench of burnt wood and blood mingled with the mist, a silent requiem for tens of thousands who had sailed south in arrogance and perished in disbelief. Along the shore, the warriors of Đại Việt stood exhausted, their armor caked in soot and mud. They did not cheer. They did not raise their weapons in triumph. They only watched the river flow again, calm and endless, as if nothing had happened. For them, victory was not a moment of pride. It was the price of survival. Trần Hưng Đạo rode along the riverbank, inspecting the aftermath. His face was calm, yet his eyes carried a weight that words could not measure. When a young soldier approached him, asking whether the war was truly over, he replied quietly, "Wars end when arrogance ends. But remember, peace must be guarded with the same courage as battle." The king declared a day of mourning, not celebration. Temples were built along the river to honor the spirits of those who had died, both friend and foe. To the people, it was not just a victory of arms, but of will, of patience, of the human spirit standing firm against the impossible. As the sun set once more over the Bach Dang, the reflection of the stakes shimmered beneath the surface like 1,000 silent sentinels. And though the empire of the Mongols would rise again elsewhere, they would never return to this river. Because on this river, they had met something greater than their power, the unyielding soul of a people who refused to drown. Centuries have passed, yet the Bach Dang River still breathes. At dawn, when the mist rises over its quiet waters, the fishermen say they can still hear the echoes of drums beneath the tide. Faint, distant, like the heartbeat of history itself. The wooden stakes, now blackened with age, lie buried beneath layers of silt, but their story remains sharp as ever. Every ripple carries a memory of courage, of sacrifice, of the day when wisdom triumphed over might. Empires have risen and fallen since then. Maps have changed, kings have vanished, and monuments have crumbled. But the river endures, whispering the same truth that Trần Hưng Đạo once spoke. No empire is eternal. Only honor endures. The Bach Dang is more than a river. It is a mirror. It asks us, across the centuries, what makes a nation undefeatable? Its armies, its weapons, or the spirit of its people, quiet, patient, and unyielding as the tide? And as the waters flow once more toward the sea, the answer glimmers beneath the waves.